Good morning, everyone. Well, that was loud enough. Okay. Good morning. I'm Jane Connolly, and I get to be president of Cal State Long Beach. And I wanted to come over and welcome all of you here to our beautiful campus. Hoping you'll get a chance to walk around a little bit. A special welcome to the 2023 Center for International Trade and Transportation Town Hall. And we've been holding these town halls since 2001, so even before I got here. And the purpose has been, since 2001, to really invite a larger number of voices and perspectives into conversations around our port growth. So over the past 2 decades, and certainly the decade that I've been here, our supply chain has become more and more complex, and I think everyone has recognized how important it is. Today's town hall brings together leaders in industry, in government, labor, and education to address issues ranging from labor actions to chassis shortages. I don't think I ever said chassis into a microphone before. That's a new one for me. Chassis shortages and to the pandemic era disruptions that we've gone through and continue to go through in some ways. This year's topic is decarbonization, truth, consequences, and hard choices. This reflects the emergence of environmental and social standards as key corporate goals. On behalf of the entire beach community, I want to thank you for taking the time to participate in this important function and thank you for your ongoing commitment to operationalizing sustainability. I know we all look forward to seeing where these discussions will lead, and my schedule is very tight today, so I wish I could stay, but I'll have to rush off when I leave. I mean, I will leave, and I'll be rushing to the next place. But now, again, good morning and welcome. And now I'll turn it over to Tyler Reeb.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Tyler Reeb. I'm the Interim Executive Director of the Center for International Trade and Transportation, and it's an honor for me to kick off what has become, I think, a real staple in the Long Beach community, as well as the Southern California supply chain community, which is the town hall event that CITT started in 2001. It's the fruit of a great many people who I respect a lot and have learned a lot from. So I'm honored to be able to help carry the tradition forward. As most of you know, the town hall concept was born out of a need to identify and address port-related conflicts, and that's no different today. Today we're taking on a very potentially controversial topic, which is decarbonization. And what we're going to do is dispense with any kind of magical thinking, any kind of unsubstantiated aspirational thinking, and really look squarely at the truth, consequences, and hard choices related to addressing decarbonization. Before I get us into today's formal proceedings, I'd like everybody to consider a notion, and you can either do it or think it. Imagine taking out your phone and looking at a little loved one, a child, a grandchild. For our animal enthusiasts in the room, it could be a pet, whatever the case might be, and imagine showing it to the person next to you. I think it's pretty clear that all of us can gut check, heart check, and say we all want cleaner air and water for future generations. There's no question about that. There's no if. The controversy emerges when we ask ourselves, how are we going to get there? And that's the substance of today. And what I can say above all else is that any difficult controversy requires key stakeholders with different viewpoints, different pain points coming to the negotiating table and not only having the expertise to identify all of the variables that are often not considered when we talk about what decarbonization means. And when I say that, I mean things like consumer demand. We are amid a period of unrelenting American consumer demand for rapid fulfillment of goods. At the same time, California, as it always tends to do historically, is leading the way with some of the most ambitious and bold decarbonization mandates in the country. how do you strike that delicate balance? This brings us back to the function of the town hall. We identify areas of potential conflict. We bring together the key stakeholders in industry, government, education, labor, community, and we figure it out. So beyond having any kind of expertise, we need to have the right values. We need to remember we're all trying to get to the same place, but it's going to require cracking that code. And I would say the best way to crack that code is to go back to the Supply Chain 101 playbook. How do we cooperate? How do we consider all of the viewpoints of all the stakeholders involved across the supply chain? And how do you, when you are faced with moments where you have an opposing viewpoint, rather than taking the personalized approach, pointing the finger, you look for the ways in which your viewpoints do align. You find a common ground and you move things forward. You consider that sometimes at critical junctures, sometimes making the least bad decision is the best decision you can make. And I'm very pleased to have this day, beginning with our great president, Jane Connolly, along with all of the other expert panelists and awardees today. All of them represent that attitude of coming to the negotiating table and in a reasonable way, in a fair way, in an empathic way, figuring out how we're going to move forward. So with that, I'd like to formally kick off CITT 2023. Let's get into it. We've got an exciting video presentation that I think encapsulates that I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. That will be followed by the presentation of the Dominic Moretti Award, which again reflects all of the attitudes that we need at the negotiating tables of the future. And then we'll get into an expert panel where we'll talk about this issue in depth with 4 experts who can cover a range of areas in this field. So let's formally talk about Dave Kelly. Another key reason why the town hall has been so good for 2 decades is because we have had a real auteur. We've had an outstanding filmmaker, storyteller, and a very bright mind who has been every single town hall at the table, hearing all of the different viewpoints of each town hall and magically putting it together into a synthesis that really encapsulates where everybody's coming from and sparks a great debate. Dave's done this again this year with our documentary of the same title of our town hall, Decarbonization, Truth, Consequences, and Hard Choices. And I'd like to call Dave up to just present him with an award and shake his hand and to ask him to mutually kick off this video with me. But first, just a round of applause for 2 decades of great, outstanding work. So this is for Storytelling Excellence. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if you'd like to say a few words.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, and I really appreciate this award. It does reflect 20 years of being involved with the CITT Town Hall video production, it's been an honor and a pleasure to work on this project every year, and I've learned a lot. I hope I've distilled a lot of that information in a way that's digestible. We take a lot of conversation that we have and distill it down into this video product. It doesn't answer all of the questions. It raises a lot of questions, but that's why we're here, to talk about those questions and see if we can get some tentative agreement on a lot of these things that we're going to talk about today. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. We're doing important work here, and I know it will continue on for the next 20 years. Thanks again.
Give us just 30 seconds to queue up the video.
As the future world economy develops with a discerning eye focused on decarbonization, one fact remains immutable. Consumers drive the demand for product manufacturing and the delivery of those products. Every aspect of sustainability begins and ends with consumer demand. This point was demonstrated dramatically in 2020 when the roller coaster ride of COVID-19 witnessed a free fall in consumer demand in the second quarter, only to be followed by a whipsaw surge in demand in the third and fourth quarters. Online shopping was turbocharged as manufacturers faced huge requests to fill orders with unrealistic consumer expectations of overnight or two-day delivery. The worldwide supply chain felt the strain. Manufacturers temporarily shut down and then ramped up production at lightning speed. In the post-pandemic era, consumers hold the horse reins on the ever-changing path to sustainability and decarbonization. What will American consumers be able to sacrifice or adjust to reduce carbon emissions? Purchasing patterns have changed significantly in the last 2 decades. One trend that hasn't changed is massive consumer credit card debt. By April of 2023, credit card debt had reached over $1.24 trillion, averaging about $3,800 for every person, including infants, in the U.S. This record credit card debt was 13.1% higher than the previous year. If consumers will not pull back in the long run, how will this affect the pace of transition and all sources of potential environmental impact?
The consumer hasn't really created the world that we live in. They like convenience, and they will select least cost solutions that they're offered. The conversation to date about sustainability and supply chain is usually around what should consumers do differently. I think to really meet the climate emergency, we will have to have sort of policies and pressures and education on every actor who influences and creates supply chains. I think there's a number of decisions that public agencies take as well as private entities take that are also will need to be sort of rationalized from a carbon intensity perspective.
The battle cry for fast transition to decarbonization includes an emphasis on battery-operated vehicles. These vehicles range from automobiles to small trucks to buses to 18-wheeler semi-trucks and various vehicles used in specialty industries such as harbor-based marine terminals. To manufacture vehicle batteries, extensive mining of essential minerals such as lithium ore, manganese, nickel, and cobalt is necessary. One major hazard has been the environmental damage and human rights violations caused by the massive extraction process. Perhaps because the demand is so great and the urgency is so acute, corners are being cut to get the minerals to the market. Chinese company CATL, which is the world's largest producer of EV batteries, has been accused of maintaining significant investments in a lithium concern suspected of engaging in forced labor practices in the Uyghur Autonomous Zone. Another obstacle to electrical vehicle battery growth is the lack of substantial immersive funding that will be required to unearth critical minerals from all places across the globe. While the U.S. has significant untapped mineral deposits, the country has been mostly content with acquiring its minerals from other nations, avoiding the kinds of costs and environmental controversies confronting other countries. Estimates are that worldwide mineral demand could almost be met by 2030 if all nations seeking these minerals participate with major investments and the willingness to mine and extract from their own natural resources. However, meeting the demand of 2030 is not the same as replacing the entire fleet of internal combustion engines currently on the road. Today, only about 1% of registered vehicles on U.S. highways are electrical. Mother Earth may not hold enough lithium and cobalt to supply all the vehicle batteries necessary to transition the entire fleet here and worldwide. Meanwhile, the 102 human rights violations worldwide involving green mineral extraction cited by the Business and Human Rights Resource Center in London, England, should offer a sobering reminder that mining activities take a toll on the planet, including on the humans living near and working in those industries.
Lithium extraction is challenging, sourced from Australian mineral deposits or groundwater brines in the Americas and China. Unlike fracking, it doesn't involve blasting or as many chemicals but has a significant environmental impact. Mining 1 ton of lithium worth around $8,000 and capable of powering 90 electric vehicles consumes roughly 500,000 gallons of water, potentially disrupting ecosystems and posing drought risks to nearby communities. Battery production, akin to mineral extraction, is both energy intensive and highly polluting. Most batteries, roughly 70% of global production, are made in China, where electricity comes from a largely coal-powered grid. It turns out that electric vehicles aren't always the perfect solution we might have hoped for. One of the biggest challenges is that manufacturing batteries for electric cars can actually generate a lot of CO2 emissions, which can cancel out some of the benefits of driving an electric vehicle.
Well before all the issues were aired about greenhouse gases and climate change, there were concerns about air pollution and air quality. While technological advancements and the evolution of cleaner fuels have drastically improved air quality in major metropolitan areas, the fact remains that population centers encounter problems based on their human density, access to transportation corridors, industrial facilities, and the mix of retail with residential neighborhoods. Living near employment is an essential ingredient in both limiting emissions and reducing extensive roadway congestion. However, freedom of choice in where one lives is also an important component of the American tradition. Many people choose not to live near factories, airports, railway hubs and tracks, marine shipping terminals, container yards, and warehouses. Some people, due to economic circumstances, may not have a choice. Urban planning at its best can resolve many, but perhaps not all, issues with aging cities and aging infrastructure. Harbors, marine terminals, rail lines, and container yard facilities are limited by the location where the ports reside. Infrastructure around those ports needs periodic improvements to facilitate the growing demand for products by consumers near and far from the ports of embarkation and disembarkation. Warehouse facilities also need to be constructed closer to the major population centers to reduce the last mile and the last 50-mile delivery process and its contribution to congestion and emissions. Other concerns regarding urban planning include landfills to absorb waste products. If a landfill is far from an urban center, this travel distance also can contribute to roadway congestion and emissions. Using fewer packaging materials in manufacturing and implementing more recycling are two helpful practices for reducing excess waste.
The trucks that are moving goods are trying to move as efficiently as possible. And if we don't find a way to make sure that they can move efficiently, they're going to take longer routes, they're going to take less optimal routes, and they're going to have not just more vehicle miles traveled, but also have more carbon impacts as they're trying to move throughout the region. So it's essential that our regional transportation system really has in mind the needs for each of the kinds of facilities to make sure that they're working optimally and safely so that we can move people and goods throughout the region in a way that makes sense, but also serves the growing population and the growing economy, but without dumping the impacts of that movement onto local communities more than we're seeing today.
The ability to transport humans efficiently and quickly, along with the goods humans consume, is the hallmark of an organized, modern society. Building a dynamic society has relied upon the abundance of fossil fuels for more than a century. Now, as rapid adoption of decarbonization takes hold, zero emissions is the ultimate goal. The problem is, even our emission-free vehicles only become emission-free after they've been on the road for nearly 5 years. Precious mineral mining and extraction combined with the manufacturing of battery-operated vehicles generates enough greenhouse gases to equal the manufacturing of internal combustion cars and their resulting emissions for at least 4 years. Proper and safe disposal of aging and used-up lithium-ion batteries is also an environmental risk hazard. California has taken a commanding lead in the market share of automotive electrical vehicles on the road. The Golden State's enormous 38.9% share of U.S. electrical vehicles eclipses the next closest states of Florida and Texas, which hold 6.7% and 5.4% respectively, and fourth place Washington State at 4.4%. California's substantial lead exists even though at least 2 studies have revealed a significant number of Californians have become frustrated with battery-operated vehicles due to their expense and the difficulty of charging these vehicles at home. The lack of sufficient charging facilities where people want to travel is another major frustration. The studies indicate around 20% of California EV owners have traded in their cars in favor of gasoline or diesel-powered vehicles. Nationwide, that average is about 26%. In the goods movement arena, the large trucks that move goods will require massive battery blocks which weigh heavily on the trucks. The battery blocks often struggle to obtain the range necessary for long-haul delivery on one battery charge. Another problem with lithium-based batteries is their flammability. Lithium-ion battery fires burn very hot and are difficult to extinguish. Heavy-duty electric truck maker Nikola Corporation recalled 209 trucks recently due to a coolant leak inside one battery pack, which caused a fire at its Arizona manufacturing plant. These batteries pose hazardous conditions and emit toxic fumes when experiencing thermal incidents in landfills. Natural gas-powered vehicles that are 98.5% or more emission-free hold great promise as an alternative to heavy-duty EV trucks for goods transportation, at least until technology catches up in producing reliable and safe long-range electrical vehicles. Biofuel technology also has improved impressively and should be considered as another viable option for the near to medium term, along with non-emitting hydrogen fuel cell technology.
I still think we are at the very beginning of decarbonization, of the move towards decarbonization. We certainly have a lot of internal combustion engine trucks on the road. It's the vast majority that are using regular diesel. I think we make a mistake if we, again, just focus on one option for decarbonization. We need to look at everything. We need to look at whether or not certain options may be worse, maybe make us worse off. Renewable diesel, for instance, if we were using that right now, let's say magically we could make enough renewable diesel, we would be decreasing our carbon footprint far more than if every vehicle were battery electric. That's a given. But can we do that? We need to figure out if it's possible to do that.
Modern and secure nations competing in the world economy require reliable energy supplies adequate to maintain stable business and commercial activities. To be truly competitive, these nations also must strive to provide a healthy, high-quality way of life for their citizens. Stability and energy reliability equal national security on par with military security. Petroleum, with its oil and fellow traveler natural gas, played a major role in both industrial security and military security in the San Pedro Bay during World War II. The harbor area produced an abundance of oil required for factory mobilization and shipbuilding, while also housing the Navy and commercial ships bringing cargo into the ports. Today, the Navy is gone, but the armada of container ships berthing in the twin ports supplies the local community with jobs. The cargo flowing through the ports fuels our national well-being and economic security. Providing the sources of energy needed to maintain the local and national economies occupies the time and talents of planners, politicians, regulators, engineers, and business executives. California is leading the way on decarbonization, and accordingly, the harbor is one of the major sources of emissions. Decisions on how to increase electrical power without adding greenhouse gases in power generation are being discussed. The pace of full transition to green energy is dependent largely on technological advancements, investments in infrastructure, decisions on fuel choices to replace bunker fuels on big cargo ships, and an eye on a diverse mix of energy resources, including those that begin as petroleum. Recent history in Europe has shown that in country after country, green energy transitions have resulted in a net loss of jobs in the energy-related sectors. Studies done in Spain, Italy, Denmark, the United Kingdom, Germany, and the Netherlands over the past 12 years or more all revealed that green energy investments and government subsidies did not provide the substantial economic benefits envisioned. In Spain, for every green job created, 2.2 previous jobs were lost. In Italy, every green job created costed the same as the creation of 5 non-green jobs. As for the UK, the results indicated that every new green job replaced 3.7 fossil fuel jobs. There may be a lesson to learn from the European experience. Perhaps becoming carbon neutral rather than generating zero emissions might be a more realistic and attainable goal, especially when considering the impact on the workforce and the economy.
I know there's a lot of chicken and egg dynamics around this problem, and it's not going to be a smooth ride. And it will take longer than everybody projects. In fact, the moniker of carbon neutral by 2050 has become practically a staple of every CEO's speech box, so they have to say it. I don't have much confidence that the world will actually reach its carbon targets by 2050, but I do have confidence that the world will reach its carbon targets and can reach net zero with a totally new energy infrastructure by about 2100 or so. And the reason I say that is just the technology and the money will evolve.
The San Pedro Bay and its supply of energy is currently and will continue to be a work in progress for the foreseeable future. Ultimately, a work in progress is the best way to describe the future in general.
Once again, I just want to have a round of applause for Dave Kelly and his great contributions. So, as always, these documentaries spark a great conversation. What we have is an assemblage of a diverse range of viewpoints about decarbonization, the path forward. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the key qualities required at these negotiating tables of the future is the right attitudes. And I'd like to call Gary Herrera, president of ILWU Local 13, to the podium to present with me this year's recipient of the Dominic Moretti Award. And just before, come on up. Thank you very much. Thank you. Just before I give the mic to Gary, I just want to mention that, and we'll let this music die too, because it's starting to sound like I'm doing a commercial for a funeral. And maybe that's it. So I didn't know Dominic as long as a lot of the people in the room did. But he made an immediate impact on me because, number one, he was the kind of gentleman that you would want to become when you're his age. Number two, he he was a hardworking guy who worked well beyond an age that most people ever worked, when, from what I understand, he could have retired and made more with a pension, with real world wage factored in. He got his PhD and started a number of really meaningful educational programs. And he had an adage that we should bring the university to the docks and the docks to the university. And I can't tell you how much I personally love that kind of egalitarianism. And that's part of what we need at the table, again, these negotiating tables of the future. So with that, I'd like to give the mic to Gary Herrera to introduce this year's very deserved recipient of the Dominic Moretti Award.
Well, thank you very much. As he said, my name is Gary Herrera. I am the president of the ILWU Local 13 in Southern California. And I'd like to say thank you to all the you guys that showed up here today to acknowledge somebody who's very special to me. Everything I say right now is going to come straight from the heart. I didn't write anything. I didn't plan on writing anything, because what this woman entails is everything that I believe in it, and everything that it is embodied in the ILW and in labor, and what we're here today for. To have tough discussions, to have consequences, truth about how we're going forward to work together. This woman has dedicated her life to working with labor, to making sure there's equality, there's fairness across the board. Somebody that we as a labor organization, the ILWU, can look to for fairness, even when truth and consequences in today's agenda. The consequences of going fully green, but those consequences of job loss. We have a voice. We're somebody who stands behind labor, somebody that represents us. My friend, not just somebody that we trust as that represents labor, but she's a friend of labor, but a friend of mine. This award, her intelligence, her background, and her education, her willingness to work with labor, to talk about the truth, as what we're here today, is I couldn't be happier to have somebody on our side, somebody represent us. There's not one person in the ILW right now that I think is better deserving, and she's not even in the ILW, but to me, she is an ILW member. She is one of us. She belongs in the ILW, in which I've already told her we're making her an honorary member this coming December. But I hope you know, with this Dominic Moretti Award, that everything that's embodied in this program, everything you just seen on this screen right now, she represents. She represents the truth and the consequences, and she's there to tell you what they are, to hopefully that those consequences are not detrimental to people, to us, because she wants clean air, but she wants jobs. And that's what we're here for. That's what the ILW is here for. So to have us here today, to be a part of this conversation, I think is huge. But it's even bigger to have somebody like Diane Middleton, who is the next recipient of the Dominic Moretti Award. It is my honor, it's my pleasure, on behalf of Local 13, on behalf of me as a man, as an individual, to say congratulations, and it couldn't be to a more well-deserving woman that I know and a friend of labor. So please welcome Diane Middleton.
Very good. Good morning, brothers and sisters. Got to start out with thanks, particularly to CITT for what I consider to be the great honor of receiving the Dominic Moretti Award. But I also have to thank the ILWU. I was born and raised in Detroit and didn't hear about the ILWU until 1976, almost 50 years ago. And when I did, it changed my life. The ILWU has been at the center of everything I've done. I've been an attorney for 50 years, and during most of those years, I represented ILWU and shipyard workers and had firsthand experiences. Everything I know about the docks, I learned from ILWU members. So great thanks to them. I knew Dominic Moretti, And I know many of the other honorees, and I am humbled to be in the company of people who made the outstanding contributions that past honorees have. And it's a great task to live up to what these people have accomplished. I'm entering my 5th year as a harbor commissioner for the Port of LA. And you all know how big the Port of LA is, our budget of over $2 billion a year, over 900 employees. I mean, a tremendous impact. They say 1 out of 9 jobs in the Southern California area are dependent on the port. For every can moved, there are 4 jobs created. So it's a tremendous responsibility. And I've thought a great deal about what makes a great port. And seeing this and hearing Gary and looking at what we're going to do the next 2 hours is a lot of food for thought. I think the first thing that is very, very clear to me, and something that has been an abiding principle I've tried to put into action in terms of my years on the Harbor Commission, is the concept of a social compact. I first heard about this concept from my great friend, the first longshoreman I ever met, Dave Arian, a past international president of the ILWU and a past vice president of the Port of LA Harbor Commission. And when Dave talked about the social compact and explained it, it's a very gripping concept. It's the idea that in communities like San Pedro and Wilmington and Harbor City, they bear the brunt of this great goods movement, of the thousands and millions, 10 million TEUs one year, of containers that move through our ports. Their streets are clogged. They have to take their kids to the emergency room for asthma treatments. They bear that burden. And the question has to be asked, what do they get in return? What is the obligation the port has to those communities who have higher rates of cancer, higher rates of childhood asthma than almost anywhere in the state? What are we going to do? What is the solution? Well, I've been privileged to serve under 3 different mayors in different administrations as a commissioner. And I can tell you, we go back to Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, who had a great slogan: grow the port, green the port. That has continued through to our current councilman, who's done a bang-up job his first 11 months in office, and I'm looking forward to the next 7+ years I know he's going to have representing us, Tim McCosker, and I'll echo what he says, and that's there are 2 things that are truly going to make a difference. One is jobs, and the other is the environment. That we can have both, just like Antonio said, grow the port, green the port. Yes, we want jobs. And I'm here to say, first of all, that we're going to fight for every pound of cargo coming back to this port, because we know that's jobs for our brothers and sisters in the ILWU and many other industries. So yes, we absolutely want jobs, but we also have to do something about the environment. The jobs that we need to create have to be good union jobs that provide for an entry to the middle class. And when I think about what makes a great port, I'm going to tell you that yes, we want to look at TEUs and who's the #1 port in the Western Hemisphere, which is the Port of LA. But beyond that, we've got to look at more. And what we've got to look at is, what are the jobs of the future? And I want to quickly share with you 3 really exciting projects at the port that I think are going to make a difference. The first is the PMA Mechanics Training Center. Gary and I were out there a couple days ago with Councilman McCosker, and the PMA has erected a $17 million facility at Pier 400 for the purpose of reskilling and upskilling mechanics. And it's an amazing operation. The first classes are going to start February 1st. That's going to retain the current longshore workforce, but with many, many new skills. And that's going to tie right into two other very exciting projects. I hope all of you know about Alta-Sea. Alta-Sea is the blue economy. The hub of it is right here in the Port of Los Angeles. And we are hoping that it is going to create thousands of good blue jobs. And as Tyler correctly said, there's going to be a lot of controversy about all of the concepts that we saw in that video. I happen to believe, and I hope it will be true, that with better environmental approaches, we're going to have more jobs, not fewer. And I look at Alta-Sea, and I look at the possibility of coastal engineering, aquaculture, robotics. These are all jobs that don't exist now. Just like 30 years ago, none of us knew what a webmaster was. But we have all those jobs now. There are new jobs that are going to be created. And I want the Port of LA to be at the center of that hub. So we have the PMA Mechanics Training Center. We have Alta-Sea, but the crowning jewel is going to be the Port of LA, Port of Long Beach, Goods Movement Campus. It is going to not only train longshoremen, truck drivers, and logistic workers, but we're going to look at those new jobs because, as we know, and it has been painfully aware to me as a harbor resident for 50 years in San Pedro, not everybody's going to get a Class A longshore book. So what are we going to do about the people that don't have the opportunity to be longshoremen? What is going to be their entry to the middle class? What is going to give them the jobs and the income so they don't add to the problems of homelessness and despair and everything that we see is wrong with our society now? I mean, I believe that we can have good health, a higher quality of life, and good paying jobs. And that's what I hope we're all going to be working for. So I am very grateful for this award. I'm humbled. It's a commitment to try and do far more than we've been doing and to make the Port of LA and our partner, the Port of Long Beach, because I believe in partnerships, to be a great force for creating good jobs and a better environment. Thank you so much for this award, and let's look forward to everything we're going to learn from this presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay, we have a very packed lineup, so I'm going to just keep moving this along. But I can't think of a better way to energize us than to think about all of what Diane just said. Just a quick note, all of the current and previous recipients of the Dominic Murray Award, if they could please join me at the end of the session today for photos, that would be great. Our next section is really it's the main entree of the morning, if we could use a food metaphor that isn't breakfast. You all have note cards on your tables. I'd like you to use them if you have good questions. Members of the CITT team are running around. There are official runners capturing questions. Please use those cards and send them on. As we saw with the great video earlier, there's a wide range of issues, a whole host of variables that are often not talked about when we talk about what decarbonization really means to the extent that we're talking about today. And that requires thoughtful people. We have a moderator for our next panel who I think embodies thoughtfulness, Dr. Genevieve Giuliano. We have leadership from the state of California with Traylon Bradley. We have technological and energy expertise from Sarah Dawn Seltzer. We have a free enterprise hydrogen hub approach with Jack Hedge. And we have a wide range of maritime and port logistics expertise and planning in our remaining panelist, Dr. Tom O'Brien. I'd like to invite all of our panelists to come up to the front and assume your place behind your designated name tent. And I'm going to hand over the proceedings to, Jen, you're going to be up here at the podium, to Dr. Giuliano, who, as I said, is far more qualified than me to lead this very important discussion. Thank you, Jen. That's yours. That's your
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Absolutely great to be here. I'm feeling like we really have a hard act to follow today because I think we all were just truly impressed with Diane's remarks after a wonderful video. So it's kind of like, where do we go from here? So we're going to give it our best shot to go from here. The video was very informing. It presented many of the trade-offs to be considered as we move forward in the energy transition. So the real question on the table is, how do we do this in the best way possible? And in a way that minimizes harm and maximizes benefits. And that's what this panel is about. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with each panelist giving us a little bit of background on themselves. And then we're going to start me asking questions. And then we're going to do Q&A, which is what your little cards are for. So as the panel goes on, go ahead and start writing up your questions. So I'm going to start with Sarah. Sarah, would you like to begin by telling us a little bit about you and your research?
Sure. Okay, sounds like that's on. My name is Sarah Saltzer. I'm the Managing Director of the Stanford Center for Carbon Storage at Stanford University. And I'd like to talk with you about some work that we have recently been doing at Stanford, looking at decarbonization in California. So the bottom line is that in order to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045, we're going to need emissions reductions in all of the 5 major sectors: electricity, industry, transportation, agriculture, and buildings. Now, the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, has recently updated their scoping plan, which lays out really a sector-by-sector roadmap for the state based on a technologically feasible, cost-effective, and equity-focused plan. So at Stanford University, we recently developed our own model. It's an energy systems model for decarbonizing California. Now, our goal was not to reinvent the scoping plan, although that's kind of a side goal. But what we really wanted was an independent assessment of the scoping plan. So now that we have our own model, we can do some really interesting things. First of all, we can interrogate the CARB scoping plan to see what we can learn from it. And second of all, we can run additional scenarios to figure out if there are different pathways to get to net zero. So what have we learned? We have a number of findings laid out in a 100-page report, which you can find on our website. But the bottom line is there's no single technology or resource that will allow us to reach our net zero emissions by 2045. We're going to need a combination of efficiency improvements, renewable electricity generation, carbon capture and storage, a lot of electrification, biofuels, hydrogen, and carbon dioxide removal. Now, specific to the transportation sector, battery electric vehicles are definitely a relatively affordable mitigation option for both heavy and light-duty vehicles. Now, deploying zero-emission vehicles, and whether we're talking battery or fuel cell, as rapidly as possible will be required if we're going to meet our 2045 goals. I have to say that actually the speed with which zero-emission vehicles are deployed is one of the single largest drivers in cumulative emissions impacts. However, as we all know, battery electric vehicles are going to require electricity, as do many of the other things we need to electrify by 2045. In fact, our study suggests that 250 to 450 gigawatts of capacity additions to the grid will be required to power our future. So the scale of this build-out is actually roughly 3 to 6 times our current grid capacity. and is 8 to 15 times the amount of capacity that we have added in the last 20 years. Just think about that for a moment. This is a huge task we have ahead of us. And by the way, 30% of that electricity growth is due to electrification in the transportation sector. We also looked at fuel switching opportunities for the transportation sector, including hydrogen. Hydrogen is currently relatively expensive as a fuel switching option, but our modeling suggests that if you're gonna bring hydrogen into the system, the most cost-effective place to do it is probably in heavy-duty transportation, compared to, say, industrial fuel switching or something like that. And I use the word relatively a lot. We're surprised to see that hydrogen generation costs themselves are actually relatively small compared to the cost of distribution and storage. So we're a research university. We think more research is needed into that area. So in conclusion, meeting California's emissions goals will require a massive amount of infrastructure build out in a very short amount of time. It's critical that the state find ways to eliminate red tape, streamline permitting, and foster cooperation between public and private entities. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Let's go to Trey Lynn.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Trey Bradley, and I am the Deputy Director for Sustainable Freight and Supply Chain at the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. It's a very long-winded way of saying it, but or GOBIZ for short. And in this capacity, I work on several elements of the supply chain, including many of the points that were directed inside the video, which I thought was very informative. Prior to this role at GOBIZ, I was one of 2 senior business development staff, working with businesses across the state of all sectors and types: aerospace, biotech, tourism, technology, freight and goods movement, helping them navigate incentives, doing site selection and permit mediation throughout the state of California. And also have worked in several other roles leading back to the Brown administration in the climate and clean energy sector. And then, tying to my position in goods movement, have been an owner of a small business in retail fireworks and own several commercial trucks. Very different from the work I do now, but not in the state of California, but in the Midwest. But definitely know what it's like to move my goods through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Really quick, I wanted to just talk about some of the points that were just made about the clean transition. I wanted to highlight what those goals specifically are, first off, to get the conversation going a little bit. Some of our goals that we have for clean energy specific is obviously we have 100% clean energy by 2045, economy-wide carbon neutrality by 2045, 60% of the state's electricity from renewables by 2030, 20 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity by 2045, 7 million climate-friendly homes by 2035, 6 million heat pumps by 2030. In transportation, all new vehicles sold are to be ZEV by 2035. Medium and heavy-duty vehicles in California to be ZEV by 2035. All new drayage trucks entered in the system registered with CARB must be ZEV starting in 2024, this next year. Garbage trucks and local buses by 2039, freight and passenger trains ZEV by 2035, and 20% of non-combustion in the aviation sector by 2045. These are humongous goals that we have at the state of California. I'm going to talk in 2 pieces of what our role in here at GOBIZ, what we're working on along with our state agency partners at the local level, directly related to that video. One is actually goods movement and our ports, our rail systems, our trucking systems. And that's that the governor and our office in the state recognize the importance of investing in supply chain and projects that align with state goals and vision. In the wake of the supply chain challenges that we have, we ushered in the single greatest investment in supply chain made by a U.S. state thus far. And of course, as mentioned before, California's ports account for over 40% of containers moved in any given year. And that includes all 12 of our ports. We have 12 ports across the state of California. 5 of those 12 move container traffic. And these ports not only move over 40%, they set records. I mean, everyone says, a lot of folks like to say there's supply chain challenges and bottlenecks, but I also like to say, they move the most goods ever in the United States history. Port of Los Angeles set a Western Hemisphere record just a couple of years ago for a port. So that is a big commends to the workforce and the laborers and folks that work directly at the port. It's a huge achievement that often gets lost in the conversation. But California's supply chain is some of the cleanest in the world, and we're making this transition. This investment that we are making in port and freight infrastructure is profound and notable across many things. I mentioned Goods Movement Campus earlier, $1.2 billion that we've recently injected in port and freight infrastructure. We have port funds that coming through our office for data interoperable systems between our container ports. Then we have also all of the multi-billion-dollar investment over 10 years for ZEB and ZEB infrastructure. Last, I just really want to talk about one thing I thought that the video brought up also, which is the actual supply chains necessary to build a clean economy. California is of all U.S. states, we export and extract and process the most critical minerals of any U.S. state. It was only 10 years ago that there were no rare earths produced or processed within California. California now produces 15% of the global rare earth supply, in addition to China. We have one of the largest lithium resources in the world that is projected to meet up to 40% of global lithium demand. We have plenty of other resources mentioned: manganese, boron, zinc, all of which we are working on. I actually have a Google map where I track these projects. 3 years ago, I could only track 4, and now 31 critical mineral projects in the state of California. And we're doing it in the most sustainable way possible. So the new space of developing supply chains is something that we're working on. It's with hydrogen, critical minerals, offshore wind, and something that we're also making humongous investments and strides in. So happy to talk about those in the panel.
Thank you. Let's go over to, let's go to Jack. 3 minutes.
3 minutes, huh? Okay. So I'm Jack Hedge. I'm the VP of Hydrogen Hub Development for brass-tacks Industries. Brass-tacks is a company based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We've been in the hydrogen space now for almost a dozen years, developing technology, developing conjunction with Sandia National Labs to modularize hydrogen production, bring hydrogen production closer to home use. One of the biggest issues today deploying hydrogen into the transportation sector and other sectors is the cost of transportation. So the ability to bring that hydrogen closer to the end user, closer to where the demand is a way to help reduce that cost of infrastructure, reduce some of the cost of barriers to hydrogen as the uptake. So the key, we think, to these ambitious goals here in California and elsewhere in the country is really about infrastructure. We can have all the incentives in the world to deploy vehicles, to incentivize vehicles, to equalize the cost of vehicles and things like that. But unless we address the issues around what I'll refer to as range anxiety, the ability to take that vehicle and do something with it and get your duty cycle out of it, get your distance out of it, cross state lines and get into other states with the goods movement, we're going to have issues on the uptake side. So infrastructure is key to making this happen. And again, a little bit about the idea around state lines. Those trucks that operate here in California don't just operate in California. They have to operate in Nevada, in Arizona, in Utah, in Wyoming, in Nebraska, and so do those trains. So we have to look at that infrastructure capacity throughout the goods movement transportation corridor network in the U.S. We don't have a national freight strategy in this country. It's something we've talked about for years, but we don't have one yet. So there's this entire ecosystem that really has to be developed, and it has to be done in conjunction not only with other players here in the state of California, but with other states in the union and the federal government. So it is a monumental challenge. The amount of infrastructure that we talked about earlier that Stanford has looked at, that amount of infrastructure, that capital investment is staggering when you think about the capital that's required, the amount of regulatory reform that is required, just the land area that's going to be taken up building new infrastructure. It's how do we get there faster, more efficiently, more cost effectively? And what does that do in terms of our environmental impacts around that new investment? And how do we focus the jobs that will create on the communities and the areas that really need good paying jobs? How do we expand the middle class? How do we grow the middle class? These are all really important questions and really important things we have to address. It's a big problem. It's a big issue. It's also a huge opportunity. And I think conversations like this that we're going to have today and ongoing are a great way to start kick out. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And Tom O'Brien.
Thanks, Jen. I'm Tom O'Brien. I'm Associate Dean in the College of Professional Continuing Education here at Cal State Long Beach. Still relatively new, getting used to saying that. But I do want to acknowledge our Dean, Chris Swarak, who has joined us, and also my new partner in crime, Lisa Turkwitz, who was here. I don't know, she had to leave. But one of the things that I hope to continue to do in this new position that I was able to do at CITT is fulfill Dominic's mission to bring the university to the docks and the docks to the university. We have seen at CITT since Marianne Gastelum had this brilliant idea back in the late 90s to create a home for dialogue and negotiation and discussion about key topics surrounding the freight sector, the port community, and goods movement. I think we've been trying to do that in the town hall, and is one example of that. My own work, I hope will continue in this new position, right? To just elevating the profile of this community and this industry here on campus and beyond. My work has sort of fallen into three principal categories, and I hope to touch upon them as we get into the discussion later. One is in the area of research. And I have existed at the intersection of policy and logistics for as long as I've been engaged with the industry for about 20 years. Because often the challenges, as you saw in the video, are not the technological ones or the vision, right? There's often a shared vision. It's in the implementation, and often that's stymied by institutional issues, politics, and other things that can create some unintended consequences. So my work has sort of been understanding why what happens. Currently serving on the National Academy of Sciences Chassis Study Committee, looking at interoperability issues with regard to chassis. It's always fun being the chassis guy in the room, the chassis researcher, because there's only one of you. And in a world of academia, that sort of makes you interesting by default, for better or for worse. And we've also, and I say we because I've done a lot of work with Jen on what happens with the longer term impacts of policies, things like peer pass, appointment systems, to understand what works, what doesn't work, so that when we try to do something similar the next time, we hopefully do it from a more informed perspective. The second of sort of the two charges that I've had as an educator has been to actually teach what we learn, using our research to inform the exchanges we have in the classroom with students, and that includes our degree programs, but also our global logistics professional program. And I'll also acknowledge Angelique, who's in the back of the room, who shepherded that project for many years. And then the third thing, in closing, is that we take our job really seriously at the university, serving as a forum for discussion, as a neutral forum. Happy to have all of the parties that are in this room as part of the discussion. And most recently, given the topic at hand, we were asked to work on behalf of the state, California State Transportation Agency, but also GoBiz, CEC, and CARB, to help convene a symposium between the ports and the Japanese Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism to discuss how California and Japan can support each other's efforts in port decarbonization and pursuing green shipping corridors. And Trey and I have been following each other around in different parts of the state. And I think having having a university sort of be present at those discussions allows us to be active and engaged observers. And that's sort of what I think we'll hopefully be talking a little bit later in the discussion.
Thank you, Tom. I was going to introduce Tom as we know, Mr. Chassis, and I didn't want to do that, but he brought it up himself, so I'm good. All right, I'm going to start with a couple of science-y questions. And I want to start with Sarah, and I want to hear something about carbon sequestration. We've all heard, those of us who've been involved with what's going on in California, right? Our heads are just overwhelmed with electric vehicles and things like that. But we don't often think about some of the other strategies that are kind of part of the mix. And carbon sequestration is one of those that is also controversial. So, Sarah, if you could tell us a little bit about your work on carbon sequestration and given the real challenges that we see in the heavy-duty sector, is sequestration something we should discuss a little more?
Oh, absolutely. Carbon capture and sequestration, there are actually two terms that I want to define and just make very clear. Traditional carbon capture and sequestration is where we go to an emitting source, so some industrial process or a power plant where emissions you can see coming out of the flue stack. And there is technology available so that you can capture the CO2 emissions before they're emitted. You then compress them and you move them somewhere else via pipeline, typically, and then you can inject them into the subsurface. So basically you're putting those emissions back, essentially from the place that they actually originally came from. And that's what traditional carbon capture and storage is. And there are about 40 projects worldwide that are doing this, and they're doing it effectively, and they've actually been doing it for close to 40 years. So this is a proven technology, we know how to do it. There's another term that we hear a lot called carbon dioxide removal. And often these two terms get kind of mixed up. But what carbon dioxide removal is, our air is 0.04% CO2. It's possible to set up huge arrays of fans, essentially, which suck in the air. You can then do a carbon capture process and extract the CO2 from that. And then again, you have your CO2, which you can inject in the subsurface. But note, the concentration of CO2 in the air, I mentioned it's 0.04%, is quite low compared to what it is at a large emitting facility. That means that the energy required to get that CO2 out is actually quite a lot. So going back to your original question, where does CCS fit? Well, there's actually quite a bit of carbon capture and storage built into their scoping plan. There's 25 million tons a year of it by 2045. But can we use that and all the efficiency improvements and emissions reductions? If we stack them all up, we're currently at about 420 million tons of emissions per year in California. If we do all of our emission abatement things that we've got planned, we will still, by 2045, have 75 million tons of emissions. We're not going to get to net zero. The CARB plan does not, through emissions reductions alone, get us to zero. It gets us to 75. So what we have to do is get to net zero. And what net zero means is we need that carbon dioxide removal, that process where I told you where we basically suck in the air, capture the CO2, and then inject that CO2 somewhere. So we need both. We need all of it.
Thank you so much. I have a second science-y question, and this one is for Jack. And again, I'm kind of honing in on some of the things that were evident in the video, and that is that we really have to look at the life cycle. If we're gonna do this right, we can't just focus on tailpipe emissions. one of the issues, at least that I hear about a lot with hydrogen, is the fuel source itself. So right now, the 1 or 2 hydrogen trucks that are running around, excuse me, are deriving the hydrogen from natural gas. So that doesn't really help us a lot in terms of reducing carbon. So there are things that's called gray hydrogen. And then there's blue hydrogen and there's green hydrogen. And the green is what we want because that's the one that's actually clean from a fuel cycle point of view. So Jack, tell us about gray, blue, green, and where are we going? Are we close enough to a green so that it will actually come in time, given California's goals?
So you asked a sciencey question to the least sciencey guy. But yeah, you're right. I mean, green's the goal. Green is the objective. The part of the infrastructure required to get us there, though, is part of that infrastructure that we talked about. That incremental amount of infrastructure that will produce electricity from renewable sources like wind, like solar, at scale large enough to make hydrogen, at a scale large enough to be useful and have a net positive impact. The scale of those renewable resources to come online is part of the infrastructure that I was talking about earlier. Those are massive solar arrays. Those are huge wind farms. Those are incredibly large projects, and they have an environmental impact unto themselves. So they may not emit greenhouse gases, but they have huge environmental impacts on habitat, on land resources, on other things. So they're not without cost and not without consequence. Gray hydrogen today, most hydrogen today is gray. It's made from natural gas, pipeline gas that's coming out of the ground. And while you're right, it doesn't get us to a net zero from a carbon intensity standpoint. The offset hydrogen use as a fuel, whether it be in an industrial process or a transportation fuel, does have a net benefit in that regard. So we are reducing that tailpipe emission or that flue gas emission from a steel making plant, a glass plant, a chemical plant, something like that, by mixing hydrogen into that fuel mix. Blue hydrogen is probably the step on the way to green, ultimate green. And by blue hydrogen, what we're doing is we're capturing methane that today is being emitted into the atmosphere. Methane is an extremely volatile greenhouse gas. Capturing those methanes that are coming off things like dairy farm manure piles and water treatment plants and landfill gas and methane that's coming off, being flared off of refineries. Capturing that methane and getting that methane into the system so that we are reducing the amount of that greenhouse gas and those impacts in the atmosphere today. It's not necessarily carbon capture, but it's kind of carbon capture-y. And getting that into the system and using that methane to make hydrogen. And with a blend of methane and RNG in a pipeline at a steam methane reforming plant, which is the majority of hydrogen today, you can get to a zero carbon intensity greenhouse gas today with about a 30% blend of RNG. If you go to 100% RNG as your feedstock going into that steam methane reformer, from a carbon intensity standpoint, using CARB's scoring mechanism, you actually get to like a negative 300 score. So blue methane or blue production in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's a very good thing. It's a very positive step on that road toward a truly green production system.
Thank you. That was a great answer, sciencey answer. I want to now go to sort of the policy side, and I want to ask Trey a question, and that's about our California being a first mover. We often say that as California goes, so goes the nation, right? Because we're so big and powerful that we can drive the rest of the country. And the question on the table here is, are other states following our lead at this point? And what do other states see as the biggest challenges?
So the answer is yes, other states are following our lead in many ways, in more ways than one. And I would say that, we have not been leading by ourselves. There are other states that have led in some ways before us, even here on the West Coast and also in Hawaii as well. But I think one thing, a great example is hydrogen. It was often for many years, to de-risk all of these technologies, you need to have a larger market. You need to have a larger market to build economies of scale and lower the price and the cost of production and implementation and the likes. That is what has been done with fossil fuels over centuries, right? And we're trying to redo and reflip the thing in less than 40 years. And so it is a monumental task ahead of us. But in order to achieve that, you have to have a global marketplace. A great example is hydrogen. For many years, it felt, I think, kind of like California and Japan were really the only folks going at hydrogen at scale and trying to meet and incentivize production, adoption, and the likes. We're now seeing this more so across the country, very much so in Europe. And I think, the conflicts in Eastern Europe have accelerated some of that investment in R&D within Europe as well. And so that just brings and lowers the price point. Getting other folks to buy in and jump into the marketing mix is important. And it can't go without saying that how important the things like the IIJA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act are in terms of investment with other states within the nation. If you take the IIJA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act, you combine all three of those major pieces of federal legislation together and you adjust for inflation, they're a little bit more than the entirety of the New Deal, which was considered one of the largest public investments in U.S. history. And some of those investments aren't going to come online. They're not going to come up immediately. There's a long runway with some of these investments. The IIJA is a 10 to 15 year bill in terms of rollout of total amount of its funds. So we will see those investments come online, but I think that those are really the marketplace incentives across tax incentives, credits, grants, that will really bring the market to places that it has not been before. You need that perfect mix of public and private investment to de-risk and bring new marketplaces into the map and into connection. I'll just give another example of hydrogen, and it's about to be done the same, which there was just a release from the Department of Energy this week for several $1 billion for battery production, manufacturing, battery research facilities regionally. We just went through this exercise with hydrogen. There were hydrogen hubs awarded across the country, including one here in California called Arches. So, these are really regional investments that the federal government is making to really build that scale across multiple states in partnership with one another. California, we have our own hydrogen hub, but we are also the fourth largest economy, or soon to be fourth largest economy, and a little bit different dynamics we have in some of the largest ports in the nation and thus world. But we're actually seeing those investments from the federal government happening at a regional level with multi-states part of it, and really accelerating this clean transition to de-risk the marketplace. That is the key: de-risking the marketplace for private and public sector investment to bring economies of scale.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I want to kind of get back to the nitty-gritty, which is kind of on the ground. And I'm going to turn to Tom for this. We heard a whole lot about what a huge undertaking we're talking about in terms of changes, entire fuel systems, entirely new vehicles, new fueling structures, new infrastructures. We go on and on with the scope of what we're talking about here. And I'd like to kind of get back to the reality of what most of the people in this room are dealing with, and that's port operations. So if you think about all of this, what do you see as the main challenges on the ground port operations?
There's no lack of them. But I actually think that the first challenge is actually one of messaging and communication. We've been talking a lot about port decarbonization, but as the video suggests, this is a broader supply chain challenge. And the responsibility is going to have to be addressed at the supply chain perspective. So sort of talking only about port decarbonization perhaps adds a layer of responsibility to the ports themselves that isn't warranted, but also suggests that the ports are going to be solely responsible for implementing it, when in fact the decisions that are going to be made at the ports are going to have to be implemented by the terminal operators. They're going to have an impact on the trucking sector, on labor. And so I think maybe reframing the discussion a little bit is challenge number one to address. And then, Jen, you said the nitty gritty. I think first and foremost beyond that is going to be the question of funding. We did just get an injection of $1.5 billion from the PFIP funding into the state's port and freight infrastructure, and 450 million of that is going to zero emission technology. That's good, but it's not enough. On the hydrogen side, the hub has received money from the U.S. Department of Energy, also good, but there has to be a mechanism for sustained funding over time so that the goals that are going to be measured throughout 2050 and beyond can be met consistently. The other thing I think that's going to be a challenge for the ports and the terminal operators is measuring targets and assessment. Right? We have sort of targets established by the IMO for those green shipping corridors, but we don't have them for port decarbonization or terminal decarbonization. I think sort of making sure that goalpost doesn't move and everybody's in agreement on what it is also something else that that's going to be a challenge. And the forums that I think we'll talk about in a little bit are one way to do that. You mentioned infrastructure, Jen. We all sort of know the challenges of the charging infrastructure, the upgrading infrastructure is also something that's going to be of significant concern and needs to be addressed, and that's going to depend upon the ocean carriers making some decisions about which fuels they're going to use, and they're going to test. The CMA CGM just called it at LA with an LNG vessel. Maersk is bringing methanol vessels online, and what that means for the ports and terminals is additional planning and additional cost. And then there's how all of this works with the sort of the operational imperatives for ports and terminals, right? They're trying to, terminals and ports are trying to meet truck turn time standards, right? At the same time as you're looking at different land uses for storage, for power generation, and all of that. So that's going to be a challenge. And then the last one I want to mention, given my other day job, is the workforce. All of these ambitious goals depend upon a well-trained and nimble workforce to be able to design, implement, maintain these strategies. So the good news that we heard mentioned this morning from Diane about the investments by both ports in workforce and building capacity is essential. But we have to be vigilant, and we have to start now for things like Pure Wind on the Port of Long Beach, right? We need to make sure that when those plans are ready to be implemented, that we've got somebody to do the work.
Thank you. In view of the time, I'm going to ask one question and have the panel answer while we start collecting. I see there's lots of cards being collected, and I want to give enough time to have Q&A. Thank you. So my one question to the panel is, I like to talk about if I were queen, right? I could do all these things if I were queen. So if you were king or queen, respectively, what's the one thing that you would recommend to our policymakers as the most important step to move forward in an effective way in decarbonization? Anybody can start.
I said it before, we need to eliminate red tape and work on permitting.
Very good. Wait, I want to, red tape.
And permitting.
Permitting.
Red tape and
Streamlining. Okay. And just for everyone in the room, you all know that it takes forever to go through an environmental process to do anything. I believe at the state level, Trey, we've made some changes for energy projects. Is that correct?
We have made some streamlining, and I will clarify the space very well, because I spent a year working in the CITT clearinghouse, reviewing environmental documents of every type in the state. The process of environmental review is not very long or challenging. It's actually can be very quick. It is the litigation and other resulting factors that extend the timeline in these projects. That is what the bill that the governor signed for infrastructure streamlining this year was. It was to guarantee windows within the courts. It is rarely ever that the state agencies and departments have streamlined this process in every way possible. CEQA is all online, it's all submitted online. I worked in there when there used to be mail delivery, people delivering FedEx boxes and just dolling them in every single day. It's all digital now, it's all automated. Every single part of the permitting process within CEQA is as streamlined as it can be in a timely manner. It is the windows of with respect to the judicial branch, which are very well defined, and the ability for folks who are outside of the permitting process to weigh within that process, and then elongate it. So that was a lot of what was addressed this last year with the legislature and the governor and some of the infrastructure streamlining. Some of that has already existed for other types of projects, but we're very optimistic that will be able to close that window and remove some of those barriers which often hold projects in kind of a window of time where they cannot then be moved.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the explanation. And let me keep going. Anybody else want to be king or queen?
Sure, I'll add one. I hope this one isn't too late, right? But I think we need to get the investment and focus of policy on the infrastructure, to the charging infrastructure. I think the mandates, the standards are pretty well set, but if they're going to fail or we're going to be delayed, it's because we don't have the charging infrastructure. And so maybe a refocus on the policy side to that, I think would help.
And just real quick, if I were queen, I would have these, look at these freight corridors and how goods move across state lines throughout the entirety.
Thank you. Okay.
Jen, I was going to add too that I have for years assumed you were queen. So hearing this morning that it's still aspirational for you is a little disorienting.
We have a lot of inside jokes, and there's a lot of very good questions. Okay, we have a Harborcraft rule here, and the question is, what can hydrogen do to help reach the efforts of the Harborcraft rule recently amended by CARB? Does anybody know about that?
Well, so Leotech today provides hydrogen fuel and hydrogen fueling equipment for the ferry that's operating up in the San Francisco Bay that's actually fueled by patient. That is a kind of a first cut at some Harborcraft marinized hydrogen fuel cell propulsion and hydrogen as a use for Harborcraft, and it's very promising. It's operating very, very well. It is operating, I think, better than had been anticipated. So hydrogen does hold a lot of promise in that regard. Again, I think you go back to what's the infrastructure necessary to support the deployment of this Harborcraft, and how do we get there? How do we focus some infrastructure development around those uses and that type of use? What we're doing today is literally it's a small trailer pulled behind a pickup truck, pulls out on the dock, you fuel the Harborcraft from there, and you drive the trailer off. In the short term, that is a viable alternative even for terminal equipment and things like that on terminals, as opposed to these massive infrastructure bills and chilling infrastructure and de-chilling infrastructure and pipelines and all that kind of stuff. There are some ways to sort of scale up and get there, whether it be Harborcraft, terminal
Thank you. The political policy goal timeline is not realistic. What is the doable scientific and infrastructure timeline? Now, we heard on the video, we had one person say 2100. Do you remember that? Are we going to do it by 2045?
Well, regardless of whether we're successful in getting to carbon neutrality by 2045, we need to try. We need to start, and we need to start now, and we need to invoke all technologies to address the problem. Even if we don't quite get to net zero so far, so I don't want to say so what, but we may not make it completely to net zero, but we've got to try. We've got to start doing it now. We can't wait until 2045 and then go, okay, we're going to do it now. We've got to start now. We're already clearly the planet. We're not going to meet our 1.5 degree Celsius increase. We're definitely going to exceed that. So we need to be starting now to try to meet these targets, whether we eventually meet them or not.
Thank you. Any others? Okay. What impacts will the transition to electricity-powered infrastructure and, let's see, in the use of electric-powered vehicles in the port make on the surrounding communities? The surrounding communities of the ports have had a long history of being the losers in terms of benefits and costs of international trade. So this question is probably voiced by many in the community. What do you see in terms of the transition and its impact on local communities?
Well, I'll take a stab at it first. I mean, the environmental impacts on communities, as we mentioned earlier, San Pedro and Wilmington and West Long Beach, places like that around the country, the environmental impacts on those communities is devastating. From an environmental health and safety standpoint, it's devastating. The other thing that often doesn't happen in those communities is the availability of jobs. Good family wage, well-paying, middle-class jobs may not necessarily come from those communities either. So not only do they bear the brunt of the impacts, they don't get the benefits from the economic activity oftentimes that's created in the ports and the harbors. So I think creating workforce development programs that target those communities and that specifically go after those communities to bring people from those communities into the workforce, whether it be around these new technologies of zero emissions or work on the docks or truck drivers or warehouse workers, whatever, but that target those communities to lift those communities and lift people from those communities into these jobs. I think it's something that's an important piece of this.
Thank you. Can I
add something, James?
Sure, yes.
I would echo that, but I'd also add that this is a challenge for the communities, but also for the planning organizations, the public sector, the regulatory agencies that are responsible for developing those plans and mitigating those impacts. I think local organizations, the communities know what the impacts are, right? But for the planning organizations, the SCAGs and the metros, they've done a really good job at getting up to speed on freight system management, right? They've done their homework. I would put Caltrans in that mix as well. They've invested in training. But now all of a sudden, they have to be experts at energy system management, right? The charging infrastructure demands, a certain set of skills and knowledge, and where those are located, and the life cycle of a battery. And so it's going to be incumbent upon them to sort of become as informed as possible to be able to be effective planners so that they're working with the best interests of those communities in mind.
I just wanted to add, one thing that's different from now and maybe 50 to 100 years ago is there's now policies in place that say you must invest in those communities because the data is there. It's what Cal and Bio screen, right? All of our cap and trade climate investment dollars say that you must invest in census tracts with the highest particular matter, the top percentage that's scored within that scoring mechanism. That did not exist 50 to 100 years ago. There is a data mechanism built within statute and law that says those communities must be the ones that receive the investment.
Thanks. It's a good reminder on where we've gone with the legislation. There are several questions here about what I'm going to call alternative fuels, and that was brought up in the video as well. The way that things are sort of falling out right now is that with the 2024 you must buy, the only you must buy that's available to buy really is an electric vehicle on the heavy duty side. Who knows how that will force the market in the future. There's talk about biofuels. There's talk about, in the video, we heard, I think it was LNG, that does 98% of the job. We also have actually a larger fleet of LNG trucks at the harbor than we have of any other alternative fuel. Do we have some other options, or are we just kind of sailing to electricity here with maybe a little hydrogen on the side?
All right, well, I'd like to talk about renewable diesel. Renewable diesel is diesel that's made from like fats and oils and rendered animal fat, and cooking grease and stuff like that, and it's processed so that it's actually chemically equivalent to regular petroleum-based diesel. So it's the same thing. Yeah, we actually have some refineries now in California that are converting to that. So renewable diesel, because those fats and everything are out there and they're a waste product, using them instead of fossil to create diesel, it does make sense to do. The issue is that there's a limited amount of these, I'll call it the feedstock, the grease that you need to make the renewable diesel. There's a limited feedstock of it in California, so we actually import most of it from outside, the feedstock, and then we create it. Now, in the modeling we did, we looked to see, well, could we just actually increase the amount of renewable diesel that we use instead of fossil diesel? And the answer is absolutely. And in fact, our modeling suggests we could use 100% of the available feedstock for renewable diesel right here in the state of California. Now that was what I said, the global suppliers stuff. We could use it all. Now, that sounds a little outrageous, and it is, because other entities might want to use it as well. But to put it in perspective, currently California uses about half of it, and that's due to the low carbon fuel standard. It actually makes sense to use it here. But still, there's probably a limited feedstock of these greases and things. So one of our recommendations is we really need to look at, are there other potential waste streams of materials we could use for renewable diesel, and is there more potential for that in the future?
And I'm going to add to that, the hybrid option as well. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is too is the hybrids are a step on the road, and I guess kind of the point is it's all of the above. There is not a silver bullet here. It is all of the above. We need hydrogen. Today it's gray, but moving through blue to green. We need battery electric charging infrastructure. We need carbon capture and sequestration. We need biodiesels. We need hybrid vehicles. We need all of the above to start to drive toward that 2045 goal. And I will say I agree. I think we need to keep the goal where it is at 2045, and don't give people an out. They get to 2100.
Actually, just to build on that, we need to stop warring or having fights. Oh, is this CCS or renewables or this or that? There's a lot of conferences I go to where we're fighting one over the other. We need to stop that infighting because we need it all.
That's very good. Thank you. We're almost at time. There have been a couple of questions about education. I think Tom would probably be the best person to tell us a little bit about what we're doing on the education side to kind of get the message out all the way down to K-12. Before Tom does that, I just wanted to acknowledge that there's one comment about the fact that labor is not on the panel. Tyler and I had that discussion, as a matter of fact. Our tradition is to always have labor at the panel. It didn't work out, mainly for logistic reasons this year. And we therefore made, we tried to make a more of an effort to feature the Dominic Moretti Award and to acknowledge all of the wonderful things that labor has done for us as well as us for them. So I just wanted to make that point. Tom, do you want to just say a little bit about education? How we might get the word out and help people to understand what a complicated problem this is?
Yeah, I love taking on this question, right? Because it's what my passion is. The first thing is that our traditional educational silos, maybe never work, but no longer work in particular for this kind of problem. It requires people who are knowledgeable in things like data analytics, right? Who have advanced degrees. But part of the solution comes from people who might need a certificate program, and there's got to be a solution for all of them. And we have to work better with community colleges, with K through 12, to create those pathways that get people whatever level of education they need at any given time. We've got to be a lot more nimble. Jen mentioned K-12. We can't wait until somebody gets into an undergraduate engineering degree for them to be sort of tackling some of these problems. We have to introduce the problem and the concepts in middle school, if not even sooner, when kids have a passion about transportation and they love the trucks and the buses. That's a great time to introduce some of these topics. There are a number of really, really great programs in the region that try to do this. I'm most intimately familiar with the Academy of Global Logistics, the Port of Long Beach Academy of Global Logistics at Rio High School, because we provide curricular support to the teachers. And one of the things that we did last year, just as an example, is we created a 12th grade capstone class for the seniors that looks at the supply chain problems of a solar panel manufacturing company. The students are organized in dynamic working groups like they would in any given company, responsible for HR, for logistics, for operations, for finance, and they have to come up with a solution. What that means is when those students go into a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree of the workforce, they're much more conversant about logistics, about the port, and that community in which they live and what they see every day. They come with a mindset to address those problems as they see the negative impacts of trucks on their streets. Then they have more tools in the toolkit to begin to solve those problems. And then they come to the workforce much more prepared. So it's got to be an integrated, holistic solution, and recognizing how rapid technological change is, it's incumbent upon us at the university to provide a means for everybody in this room to come back and refresh their skills. I know we're working on things like credit for prior learning for people who want to sort of take the knowledge that they've built in the workplace and connect it to additional educational opportunities, whatever they might be. We have to recognize that people are going to be needing to look to the university for certificates and badges, and that's all things that we're working on.
Okay, Tom, thank you so much. We're out of time. We have one more thing to do before we let you go today, but I want to congratulate a very good panel. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we have one last element in the program that's very important. There's a gentleman who would have had great contributions to this discussion today. His name is Rick Cameron, and I'd like to invite anybody from the Port of Long Beach who would like to come up and say anything about Rick that was on their hearts. So I'm just going to wait for a minute here. Okay, short of that. Okay, great. one other thing you can all do is in your digital programs, you can call them up right now and you can find the file on Rick as well. This one.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I'm Joel Perler. I'm the Economic Development Manager at the Port of Long Beach. Actually didn't work in Rick Cameron's division or in his bureau, but working interdepartmentally, I got to do some stuff with him, see him in action, and hear about all the love and respect that he got. Wow, this is more difficult than I thought it'd be. Rick was a superstar in our industry and really propelled a lot of change and mentored a lot of people and was a great person, a great port employee, a great dad. I mean, you name it, he was great at it. And I want to thank you allowing us to honor him this morning. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Teresa Downgo. I'm the Director of Port Planning at the Port of Long Beach. I was not prepared to make some remarks to all of you this morning, but certainly he was on my mind this morning, knowing that there would be a time during the program to honor Rick Cameron. This is really difficult for me. I don't know I'm going to be able to get through it. It's been such a huge loss. Not having Rick at the Port of Long Beach anymore. He meant so much to me personally, as well as I know his impact over his very long career at the Port of Long Beach and in the industry. He was our guiding star in terms of planning at the Port of Long Beach, and knowing how passionate he was about the Port of Long Beach and planning, community, advancing not just the port's interests, but all of our stakeholders' interests. And he did it with such heart and fervor. He had such great energy, and I miss that so much every day, because that's what you need in this industry. We know it takes a lot to move the needle, and we need everybody's passion and energy in order to achieve these huge goals that we know have a global effect, and it has a local effect at the same time. But most of all, Rick, he had such a huge heart. He always said family first, and he meant that. He meant that from the standpoint that he was a family man, but he knew that the Port of Long Beach family was knitted together by how we worked together, how we treated each other. And he was always the first person too to break the tension in a room with a joke, or just a little bit of self-deprecation. And that was something that was just really special about Rick. He knew himself, and he knew that he carried a lot on his shoulders, and it was a lot of responsibility, but he took it on. He took it on knowing that that was a responsibility that sometimes it takes, and not to set it aside, that you carry on. And so I really miss Rick so much and appreciate everything that he's done for me personally. He has helped me so much throughout my career in terms of the advice that he's given, the support, silent as well as in those comments that he's shared with me. But thank you so much for taking the time to honor Rick. There are many, many other people at the port, and I know industry and community-wide that have felt his impact and appreciate his friendship and professionalism and his contributions. So thank you.
if you guys could stand, to stay standing. So I opened up talking about how, in theory, we could all take a phone out and look at a picture about somebody we loved, and how that affirms that we all care about our futures. In honoring Rick and his legacy, I'd like to invite everybody to take their phones out and either call up the biography or just the light on your phone, and let's just have a moment of silence, and then let's carry on like Rick would have wanted. So let's do it. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next year at Town Hall 2024. Have a good morning. Oh, and after, if all of the recipients, current and past, of the Dominic Moretti Award could come up front, and whoever has the birthday closest to today takes the centerpiece at the tables. What's up? You can just put the original slide up, that'd be great.